Recent times have witnessed several companies which had impeccable reputation suddenly going bankrupt and insolvent, mainly due to the greed and avarice of the promoters. Extreme greed and self-centeredness are the twin curses that has affected many ruinations. Greed, which has a biological basis, is nurtured in social environment. I had to grow at the cost of others is the genesis of greed. In this podcast, I will try to explain the genesis of greed and self-centeredness and how we can see and control it in our lives. And to start with, let me tell you a real story to explain this phenomenon of greed and self-centeredness. That was in the early 80s when I had to visit Mumbai in India to get the J1 visa for my parents. They were flying to US. My father was appointed as a professor in the East-West Center in Honolulu, Hawaii. And as he was not feeling well, he had asked me to go to the US consulate in Mumbai to get the visa. Not knowing anyone in Mumbai at the time to stay, I somehow managed to get a recommendation letter from a member of a legislative assembly to provide me accommodation in the hostel reserved for government officials. When I checked into the hostel room, there were 4 youth of my age already occupying the room, and I had to share the room with them. One boy, whom I will name as Dr. X, among that group attracted my attention. Why? But before that, he had come to attend an interview to be selected as a doctor. He had just qualified to become a doctor, and he was applying for a job as a doctor in a medical institute run by the government. He appeared to be extremely greedy and selfish. And why do I say so? Well, the room allotted to us had only one cot, and the first thing this boy did was to place his suitcase on that cot so that no one can occupy that. And there were 6 of us. It was night time, and when the dinner came, all were sitting down, and all of a sudden the boy pounced and grabbed as much food as he can hold and went back to his cot. He had grabbed so much food that others had very little to eat. And the worst part was that this boy could not consume even a quarter of what he had grabbed. After the boy had gone to sleep, the rest of the group started having animated discussion about how greedy this budding doctor was and how he used every opportunity to grab whatever he could. Cut to the year 2000, there was a news item in all major newspapers that this Dr. X was arrested for taking out kidneys from unsuspecting people and selling it to those who need it for a hefty price. He had made millions indulging in such a ghastly practice and was duly convicted and sentenced to several years in prison. All his wealth and real estate got confiscated. It was the insatiable greed to amass more and more wealth that drove this Dr. X to indulge in such activities. Penniless and rotting in the prison cell within few months of his arrest, our friend had a heart attack and died. For Dr. X, life without money had always seemed incomplete, but money without life turned out to be quite useless as well. Dr. X is a very good example of the greed and excess that is the hallmark of many in every society. Greed is a characteristic that cuts across most human endeavors and goes back as long as our species has been on the earth. Throughout humankind's history, greed has had a mixed press. On the one hand, it has been hailed as the driver of economic growth and human progress. On the other hand, uncontrolled greed has been seen as the cause of much misery as recent economic history has shown very dramatically. There are many corporate examples to highlight this point. In spite of these examples, our culture unfortunately continues to place a high value on materialism and by extension greed and extreme self-centeredness. Are there any warning signs by which we can pinpoint the phenomenon of uncontrolled greed? And the answer is yes. What are those signs? The first sign is for the greedy people is a overtly self-centered behavior. As I mentioned earlier, I, me and myself, with very little regard for the needs and feelings of others. Feelings, this is important. The second sign is the jealousy. In fact, I would say that jealousy, envy or greed, they're like twin brothers. While greed is a strong desire for more and more possession, such as the material wealth and power, envy goes one step further and includes a strong desire for the possession of others. I am not satisfied with what I have, but I need what others have. And that's the beginning of envy. Third, and perhaps the most important sign, is lack of empathy, lack of genuine affection, lack of genuine caring, lack of being concerned about the feelings of others. It's not part of their repertoire at all. They have little qualms about causing pain to others, hurting others. Their inability to empathize, their lack of genuine interest in the ideas and feelings of others, and their unwillingness to take personal responsibility for the behavior and actions makes them very difficult people to deal with. I have several cases when I examine the compatibility of couples, I realize one major singular, if I may put it that way, singular cause of divorce is either the bride or the groom having no empathy. They lack this feeling of genuine concern for others. Next sign is they're never satisfied. Greedy people look at the world as a, if I had to use the word, zero-sum game. Instead of thinking that everyone would benefit if the pie gets larger, they view the pie as a constant and want to have the biggest part. Remember my friend who wanted to have maximum food just for him and wasted half of it? They truly believe that they deserve more, even if it comes at somebody else's expense. Greedy people are past masters in the art of manipulation. They're highly gifted, if I had to use that word, in taking credit for work done by others. In the corporate world, we see many managers who expect their juniors to do the hard work, whereas the PPT presentation is done by them. This is manipulation. They can be charming, but their principal agenda is to have people around them that feed into their ego. Greedy people, unfortunately, are into the short run. They are focused on satiating their immediate needs and leave it to others to cope with the consequences. To illustrate, as leaders of corporations, they are more interested in getting their bonuses instead of making investments for the future innovation, investment in R&D, or to share whatever benefits accrued with their employees. In the pursuit of their material wealth, they know no limits. Greedy people are no good in maintaining boundaries. In that sense, they are boundary spanning executives. They will compromise moral values and ethics to achieve their goals. They look for loopholes or clever ways to outsmart the rules and regulations that have been put into place to moderate this kind of behavior. What I have learned from experience dealing with executives that suffer from the greed syndrome is that it is usually the stupid decisions born out of greed that prompts them to make changes. Often setbacks such as health issues or serious interpersonal problems propel them to confront their addiction to greed. To create a motivation for change, people obsessed by greed may have to go on an inner journey, perhaps accompanied by a coach or a psychotherapist, to uncover the unconscious sources of their singular pursuit of power and wealth. Doing so may imply dealing with the childhood setbacks, conflicts that they have experienced that makes them behave the way they do. It means that they may have to deal with unresolved conflicts, to cope with pent up emotions, anger, to work through unfulfilled dreams, and to face the various defense mechanisms that drive them towards excessiveness. They may also need to become acquainted with what is really essential in life, such as empathy, intimacy, love, unconditional acceptance, and so on. People suffering from the greed syndrome need to find ways to move on from egoistic striving to more altruistic ones. It's important they recognize that they have a choice. This means stepping back, looking at other options to open to them, rather than mindlessly following their cravings for more and more and more. Greedy people need to recognize that we can only be rich if we are able to give. It's like power. The more you share, the more powerful you become. Taking this route requires persistence, patience, humility, courage, commitment. Not doing so, however, will be at their peril, as my doctor friend ultimately discovered to his detriment. The bigger question we should ask ourselves is, how can we change the societies we live in that are based too much on acquisitions and excesses? As Schopenhauer, the philosopher, said, wealth is like sea water. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. If we learn how to overcome the greed, we may have a simpler, more meaningful, happier, and richer life. I only wish that our Dr. X had learned the lesson much earlier in his life. Thank you.